Just who is Graham Plattner? Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going over a new report out of the state of Maine where Democrat Graham Plattner, an oysterman and harbor master from rural Maine, has officially entered the 2026 U.S. Senate race to take on Republican incumbent Susan Collins. Now this is emerging in Maine as things are still very much up in the air for who the Democrats are going to nominate, including Democrats nationally trying to recruit the governor of the state, Janet Mills, into this race. But in this article from ABC News, it goes over Graham Plattner, his background, and some of his key policy positions. I'll just run through this very quickly here. Graham Plattner is a military veteran and oysterman from a small town near Maine's Acadia National Park. He is running for the U.S. Senate race as a Democrat, and he announced last Tuesday in an effort to oust Republican Susan Collins, who the five-term senator is expected to run for re-election next year. A campaign launch video shows Plattner, bearded and broad-shouldered with a gruff voice, harvesting oysters and chopping wood, as he describes how Maine has become, quote, essentially unlivable for working-class people. In an interview last Monday with ABC News, Plattner said he was driven to run by the growing wealth gap in the U.S., which he said has crippled working-class people in his home state. He said, "We are moving in a position where regular working-class people can't even afford to live in the towns that they were born in," said Plattner, who, after four tours in Iraq and Afghanistan with the Army and Marine Corps, moved to the coastal community of Sullivan, where he grew up. This is what he looks like right here as well. This is what he looks like. Plattner might draw comparisons to Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman or Dan Osborne, the union leader running as an independent for the Senate in Nebraska, after a failed attempt last year. Both men campaigned for the Senate as champions and representatives of the white working class, a demographic with whom Democrats have lost ground in recent electoral cycles. Plattner, who has hired Fight Agency, a Democrat consulting firm whose members have worked for Fetterman and Osborne's campaigns, as well as that of Democrat Zohran Mamdani, the Democrat candidate for New York City mayor, saying, "I drink coffee every morning with the guys that I work next to and who are friends of mine, who all voted for Donald Trump. And they voted for Donald Trump because they wanted something new, they wanted change," Plattner told ABC News, arguing that his understanding of these voters could help steer the Democratic Party, which he described as quite confused, back to a winning track. The Democratic Party needs to return to an age where it is the party of labor unions, it is the party of community organizers, it is the party of fighting for big structural change to benefit working class people. Asked who he believes the face of the Democratic Party, Plattner said there isn't one, but he indicated an affinity for some of the most progressive members of the Senate, including former Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. He respects Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, and Sheldon Whitehouse, Democratic Senator of Rhode Island. Plattner also described Medicare for All as an urgent priority and called the war in Gaza a genocide, saying he follows the lead of Israeli scholars on genocide. And the article goes into more specifics on Plattner's specific policies, but I'm just going to leave it at that for the purpose of today's video. So this is very interesting because if you've been watching my channel for a while, or if you're new to my channel, I've been covering the Maine Senate race as one of the top competitive Senate races in 2026. And it's been clear for a while now that the Democrats don't have one single candidate at this current point in time in the race that they can really rally behind. And I would say that Graham Plattner, at least based on the discourse I've seen on social media, specifically on X, it seems Plattner has started off with the most momentum of all the Democrats in the race. That Plattner has been able to catch a lot of attention on social media and by a lot of national media figures, more so than any of the other Democrats have so far. Now, there's a big question on this race, which is hovering, which is, what does the Democratic governor of Maine, Janet Mills, decide to do? Because this is when you kind of get into the nitty-gritty of elections and politics and such. What makes a very good candidate? Well, obviously a very important aspect of campaigns is charisma and the candidate personality and the candidate themselves. But another key important aspect that is often considered in races like this is what has the person done in the past. And therefore, when you're talking about a race for U.S. Senate, having the person that is currently the governor of the state is usually a very big plus, especially for a general election. Janet Mills, the two-time Democratic governor of the state of Maine, if she were to be the Democratic nominee, would probably have a stronger chance in the general election, as she has more of a proven track record at winning a general election. Whereas someone like Graham Plattner, who is a first-time political candidate, does not have that same track record that someone like Janet Mills does. But At the same time, sometimes having no election history to run off of and being a first-time candidate can actually be a very good thing for a person's prospects. We just saw this sort of in New York City with Zohran Mamdani. He was a, I believe, city councilman, but he did not have a long track record of electoral politics in New York City, and he was able to defeat former Governor Andrew Cuomo. President Trump, you can make a very similar argument of. Never held elected office before that, and he was able to win 2016, the Republican primary, against a lot of senators, governors, past governors. So not having election experience is not a deal breaker in a lot of these primaries, but it usually means it's going to be a much harder, tougher fight. But the prospects of Plattner being the Democratic candidate are very fascinating. And there is also a new development here, which is that Graham Plattner has received the endorsement of U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, the Democratic aligning, quote-unquote, independent senator from Vermont. So unless Mills or someone else like Attorney General Aaron Frey enters this race, Graham Plattner right now has a lot of the media attention and the momentum in this race to potentially be the Democratic nominee. Now, all this ends up talking for the general election versus Susan Collins, the Republican incumbent, where right now, 3 out of the 4 political prediction websites, Inside Elections, Political Report, and Savile Crystal Ball, all have a very slight advantage for Susan Collins in this race. And when you look at the recent election history in the state of Maine in 2020, Susan Collins was able to win her Senate race against the Democrat Sarah Gideon 51% to 42.4%. So about a likely 9-point race or so in the state of Maine. Now, this is pretty atypical for the state of Maine, when at the same level on the presidential side of things, we can actually look at how that ended up going, which is that in Maine, Kamala Harris won the state by about 7 points at the presidential level just back in November. And the track record of Maine is that Maine is more of a Democratic or likely Democratic state at the presidential level, including its other U.S. Senate race, which is currently held by independent Angus King, who also caucuses with the Democrats. He just won his Senate race by about 17 points. So Maine voted for the Democrat for president, and the independent senator who caucuses with the Democrats voted for him by pretty large margins. So Susan Collins is running as a Republican in a state that's more Democratic friendly. In the last time, she was able to win by 51% to 42.4%. Now, at the same time, it's important to note this was the smallest margin of victory in the Senate race in Maine since 2002. In 2008, Collins won by 23 points. 2014, it went Republican by 37 points. Whereas this time in 2020, it voted only by about 9 points for Collins. Now, a lot's going to be talked about for 2026 because Susan Collins' approval ratings are not relatively strong in the state of Maine. These are problems she's had in the past and in 2020, which led to a very competitive election, but she was able to pull out a very hard-fought victory. How this all goes for 2026, we're going to have to wait and see. But 2026 is supposed to be a midterm year that's more favorable for the Democrats than the Republicans. And looking at the map from 2020, we saw something that Susan Collins did that President Trump was not able to do in 2024. You look at right here, Cumberland County. This is where the city of Portland is. Portland is not the capital of Maine, that is Augusta, but Portland is the largest city overall in the state of Maine. And you saw Sarah Gideon, the Democrat, winning this county. But you look at all the other counties in the state, they all went red except for Knox County, which very narrowly voted for Sarah Gideon. And this usually does not happen. For instance, York County. This one borders with the state of New Hampshire, and it voted for Susan Collins by about 5 points. Just looking at the presidential race, looking at how President Trump did in this county, and you'll see that York County voted for Kamala Harris by about 10 points over Donald Trump. And that's with pretty much everything in Maine trending towards the Republican direction. We can actually look at the state results more in depth here. To 2024, you see here, York County shifted 2.1% towards President Trump. Portland and Cumberland County, not much of a shift, but 0.3% shift towards Trump. Lincoln County did move 1 point towards Harris, but most of the counties in Maine either barely shifted or shifted significantly towards President Trump and the Republicans. So Maine's going to be very interesting to watch for in 2026 because Maine did shift a little bit to the right in 2024, but now in 2026, it's going to be an election environment that is a lot different than 2024. And it depends on how well the Democrats are doing, because Susan Collins is the only Republican running as a U.S. Senator in a state that Kamala Harris won in 2024. But if Susan Collins was able to do this back in 2020 when Donald Trump also lost the state of Maine at the presidential level, at the same time Susan Collins was winning, the state of Maine voted for Joe Biden by about 9 points. Can Susan Collins break the trend of Maine at the national level of being a Democratic state and win again in 2026? That's going to be the question. And this is going to be a very fascinating race to watch, because whether it's Graham Plattner being the Democratic candidate or Janet Mills or Aaron Frey or another Democrat in this race, they're going to be looking at this map from 2020 where Collins got 51% of the vote and say, okay, where can we improve? Or they're going to be looking at the 2024 map against Donald Trump and hoping that they can really more replicate this map. I think if Susan Collins does end up losing this race, I don't think it's going to be a massive blowout like we saw. I think the best example we could see is something kind of similar to what happened with Sherrod Brown in 2024, where the Republican Bernie Moreno defeated Sherrod Brown by 3.6%. And Brown, even though he lost this race, he lost by a pretty competitive margin. I think this is something we could potentially see in Maine. Maine also has an interesting election process where they utilize ranked choice voting if no candidate breaks 50% of the vote. So I was going to say Pennsylvania could be an example, but in this one, McCormick only got 48.8%. In Maine, the winning candidate must break 50% of the vote after ranked choice voting. So I don't think we're going to see an exact replicate of it being a super tight race under 1 point in the state of Maine in 2026. But if Susan Collins were to lose, I think we would have to see ranked choice voting likely be utilized, and it would probably be like a 50 to 48, 51-49, something like that situation. But it's very interesting to watch for in the state of Maine. Maine obviously plays a very important role in the 2026 Senate map, where I currently have it listed as slightly favored for the Republicans in the lean category, in between a 1 and 5% margin of victory as of now for Susan Collins. Maine also plays an important role in the Senate control, as right now Republicans are favored in 52 Senate seats, Democrats are favored in 45, and I have 3 currently listed as toss-up on my updated 2026 Senate map. So which party wins Maine, whether it's Susan Collins the Republican, or maybe Graham Plattner the Democrat, or maybe Janet Mills the Democrat, Maine's going to play a very important role in determining which party controls the Senate. And if the Democrats are unable to take the Senate in 2026, by winning the state of Maine, it would significantly cut into the Republicans' margins of holding the Senate and giving the Democrats a real chance at flipping it, if not in 2026, maybe in 2028. So Maine plays a very important role. If Maine were to go down, then the Democrats, if they were able to win Michigan and North Carolina, flipping that one blue, and Georgia, this would get the Senate 51 for the Republicans, 49 to the Democrats, where even if the Democrats lost Ohio and Iowa, Nebraska, and Texas, this would still give the Democrats a really strong chance of flipping the Senate in 2028. So Maine plays a very important role in the 2026 Senate map, and this is a race I am watching very closely heading into next year. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, any questions or comments you have. I can't wait to check all those out. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today I'm looking at the 2025 governor elections that are up in the states of Virginia and New Jersey, and I'm assigning each state based on the latest poll conducted in each of these very close governor's races. So these 2 races that are up, first we'll start with the state of Virginia. In 2021, the Republican candidate Glenn Youngkin was able to defeat former Democratic Governor Terry McAuliffe in a very close competitive race. Now, a few things were happening here. In 2021, this was as President Biden, the Democratic president at the time, his approval ratings started to fall pretty mildly in the last few weeks leading into this election. So there was a lot of national anti-democratic sentiment happening in this race. There was also a lot of momentum that Glenn Youngkin was able to build in the state of Virginia, particularly on the issue of education. Now, this ended up resulting in a very, very close race where Youngkin was able to defeat McAuliffe by around 2 percentage points. Now, this is a lot different than what the race was back in 2017, where we actually saw a very different result from this, where the Democrat was able to win. Oh, that's New Jersey, excuse me, here's Virginia, where Democrat Ralph Northam was able to defeat the Republican Ed Gillespie by roughly 9 points. Now, in this one, this is as President Trump was in his first term, he was president, and his approval ratings at the time started to go down a lot in recent weeks, heading into the final few days of this election as well. So this is kind of the inverse of what 2021 ended up looking like. Now, the only thing is that Virginia is more of a I would say likely Democratic state at the presidential level. So when things break against the national Republican president in the state of Virginia, it hits a lot hard in the margin of results for the Republicans in Virginia than for the Democrats do. So just to give you an idea, again, just to show you the recent history of these elections in Virginia, it was about a 1.9% win for Youngkin, the Republican. 2017, Northam won by about 8.9% against the Republican Gillespie. And just to show you, back in 2013, this was a very interesting situation where Terry McAuliffe became the governor of Virginia, winning against the Republican Ken Cuccinelli by 2.5%. Though this election was very fascinating, as a third-party candidate took about 6.5% of the vote away. Now, the most recent poll out of the state of Virginia for 2025 is a poll from Roanoke College, was released about last week, and conducted last week, and it shows Abigail Spanberger at 46%, Winsome Sears at 39%, roughly a 7-point lead for Spanberger, the Democrat, over Sears, the Republican. And this is pretty much right in line with the current Realtor Politics polling average of Spanberger plus 7.3, 14% still undecided in this poll. So based on that, Virginia would go into the likely Democratic category, which is in between 5 and 15% margin of victory. So that's where Virginia is right now. Now, this is going to be a very interesting race to watch for, especially in the Virginia suburbs, seeing how the map ends up looking like on Election Day compared to the 2021 map and compared to the presidential race in 2024, where we saw President Trump lose to Kamala Harris in the state of Virginia by about 6 points, 52 to 46, and you saw Harris put up pretty strong numbers in Loudoun County at 17 points, Fairfax 66 to 31, Prince William 58 to 40, and even in Virginia Beach, voting for Harris 51-48, but these numbers were also down from what Joe Biden got in 2020, where Biden won the state by about 10 points. That was a telling sign early on that this election was going to be a lot closer than 2020, and the Republicans were doing better when Harris was underperforming in Virginia compared to 2020, despite the fact that she was still winning the state. So Virginia has a lot to show in this governor's election and how things are going to end up potentially going there. Now, the state of New Jersey is also very interesting to watch for 2025, as back in 2021, the Democratic incumbent governor Phil Murphy, who was running for re-election at the time, faced off against Republican Jack Ciattarelli. And in that same election environment, that was anti-Democrat, anti-Joe Biden in New Jersey, which was a much more Democratic state at the time than Virginia was. Now things are kind of more equal in terms of how blue these states really are, based on how they voted in 2024. Phil Murphy was only able to defeat the Republican Jack Ciattarelli by 3.2%, Murphy getting 51.2%, Ciattarelli getting 48%. And this was very much of a surprise, as the polling heading into Election Day showed Murphy leading by a much larger margin than this when everything was said and done. So this was a very shocking result, and you saw some impressive wins in places like Morris County for Jack Ciattarelli, and improving on margins in Monmouth and Ocean, Hunterdon, and Warren and Sussex, as well as Ciattarelli's strong performance in Gloucester, Salem, Cumberland, and Atlantic counties as well. This is a very important race to watch for in New Jersey and how this all ends up going. Now, in 2017, however, we saw Phil Murphy win 55.7% to 42.2% against the Republican Kim Godano. Now, this was after 2 terms of Chris Christie being governor of the state of New Jersey, and his approval ratings were very poor, which could have led to a very massive win for Phil Murphy. I do believe Godano was the lieutenant governor of New Jersey under Chris Christie, so that likely hurt her even more. I don't think a 13-point victory is on the cards for the Democrats or the Republicans in 2025, but this was a very big Democratic win. Also, I did forget to show, here's the 2017 map of Northam versus Gillespie. This is what it ended up looking. Again, blue in the D.C. suburbs by pretty large margins, and blue in the Virginia Beach area as well. Just important areas to mark. Now, for the polling in the 2025 election, the most recent poll out of New Jersey came from Rutgers and Eagleton, showed a lot of undecided vote left out there, but the first part of the poll showed that Mikey Sherrill, the Democrat, has 44%, the Republican Jack Ciattarelli has 35%, 3% saying other, 17% still undecided at this time. So like with 2021, the polling in New Jersey is not really honing in on who the undecided voters are going to get at this current point in time. This race is still very wide open, but Mikey Sherrill in the most recent poll leads by about 9 points, which would put the state of New Jersey into the likely Democratic category, as well as 5 to 15 points. So that's how the 2025 governor elections are supposed to go right now, based on the most recent polls, with Virginia and New Jersey both being likely Democratic. And it's going to be very interesting to watch and maybe come back to after the election in November, where we obviously find out how this all goes. At this current point in time, these races are interesting because it certainly looks like the Democrats have the advantage in these races. The election history of off-year elections right after the presidential election suggests the party that did not win the presidential election usually is in for a good night. So this should be a very good night for the Democrats. But obviously, this is a very important election to watch for and race to watch for as we get ready for the midterms. It's also worth noting New Jersey had a very interesting development where it only voted for Kamala Harris against Donald Trump by about 6 points. We saw Trump make a lot of improvements in places like Morris County and Passaic County. When back in 2020, we saw Joe Biden win the state of New Jersey by 16 points against President Trump in 2020. And that shifted all the way to only about a 6-point win in 2024. So New Jersey is very interesting to watch for a lot of reasons. One, it could potentially show, is New Jersey going to revert back to being more of a solid Democratic state, or is 2025 going to be proof that New Jersey is becoming much more of a competitive state that even right now, even if it still leans for the Democrats, it may not be long for staying in that reliably Democratic category. So New Jersey is a very important state to watch. Virginia, which is already in this likely Democratic category, what does it do in 2025? This is going to be very interesting to watch as well. After the Republicans won almost shockingly in 2021, does it go more to the left in 2025? Maybe it's like a little bit of a Democratic resurgence in the state, even though they still have a pretty strong standing. What happens there? So that's the latest polls in Virginia and New Jersey, and they show the Democrats leading both by a likely Democratic margin. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today I'm talking about the state of Texas and the latest news on its 2026 U.S. House map. So we had a few developments last week where on August 20th, after the standoff between the Republicans and the state legislature and the Democrats leaving the state of Texas, and how that situation all played out, eventually the Texas State House passed congressional maps targeted specifically 5 Democratic congressmen and congresswomen. First being Mark Vesey, who represents Texas's 33rd district, Greg Casar, who represents Texas's 35th, Lloyd Doggett, who represents Texas, I believe. It does not say which one he represents, but his district, Julie Johnson, who represents Texas's 32nd district, and Democratic Representative Al Green, who actually became pretty famous online after he got thrown out of the State of the Union address by President Trump for being disruptive of the Texas 9th district. All 5 of them in their districts are targeted by the congressional redistricting map. On August 23rd, the Texas State Senate passed the map with a vote of 18-8, and it's heading to the governor, Republican Greg Abbott, where he is pledged to sign it into law. So this is very interesting here. And on 270towin.com, the Cook Political Report's latest map shows where things stand on Texas with these changes taken into account. So you see, for instance, Texas 34, which is held by Democrat Vicente Gonzalez on the new map. It is now listed as lean for the Republicans. Texas 15, which is held by Republican Monica de la Cruz, is now listed as likely Republican. And you start to go into more of the Democratic areas here where and how these districts will go. First, we'll go into the Houston area, where Al Green is Texas 9th district, is now listed as safe for the Republicans, whereas before it'd be safe for the Democrats. Nothing really changes too much in Dallas up here, or Julie Johnson's district, Texas 32, does be safe Republican now. Now, if you want to look down in Central Texas, you can see that here it is, Texas 35, but Greg Casar is now listed as likely Republican in here as well. So these are very significant developments for the Texas congressional map. Texas 28 with Henry Cuellar will still be a toss-up race, and that's where things stand on that front. Now, this is very important because these changes in Texas are not going to be done in a vacuum. As in California, the Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom is pushing to have a referendum for the November election about redrawing the California congressional map. And their redrawing of the California map could be even more politically advantageous for the Democrats than Texas was for the Republicans, where it's looking like Republicans are going to net about 5 seats in the state of Texas. Democrats in California are targeting even more, potentially able to flip 5, if not even up to 8 seats in the state of California. So there's a lot of ramifications here, but first that referendum has to pass. So far, the support early on shows the Democrats have a very good chance at passing that referendum in November of 2025. But right now, based on the Texas redistricting and the U.S. House map, Cook Political Report has Republicans favored at 215 House seats. Democrats have 202. Now, this is where things are going to get very, very interesting. Because right now, the way the House is currently constructed, the Republicans only would need to get to 218 seats to hold a majority in the U.S. House. They only need 3 more seats. Democrats, to get to 218, would need to win about another 16 seats. Now, obviously, this is going to change a lot on the House map going into 2026, but the way the map is currently constructed, the Republicans only need 3 more, which means the Republicans could get there, for instance, by, say, Jared Golden in Maine losing his House race, which voted for Donald Trump by about 9 points, I believe, in 2024. The former governor, Paul LePage, is running against Jared Golden. This could be one of the 3 seats the Republicans flip. You could also look at Ohio, where their map may be getting redrawn with Marcy Kaptur in Ohio 9. That could be a Republican flip. Ohio 13 with Amelia Sykes could be a Republican flip. And Ohio 1 could be a Republican flip as well. We could also look at the state of Indiana, where President Trump is putting pressure on state Republicans to try and redraw their map, likely to get rid of Indiana 1 with Democrat Frank Mervan, and maybe try and target Indiana 7 with Democrat Andre Carson. I'm not sure if they'll be able to get that one out, but they may definitely be able to get out Indiana 1. So it's very interesting because the redistricting battle is still going on right now for 2026, and it's really a complicated situation. But based on just how Texas did right now, the Republicans are in a much more advantageous situation heading into 2026 to keep the House than they were a few weeks ago. Now, this is big news for the Republicans because when you look at the early polling for 2026, the generic congressional vote currently has the Democrats up by about 3.6%. And this tracks essentially how nationwide do voters feel like they'd more want to vote for Democrats or Republicans. And Democrats are up by 3.6%. In 2024, the National House vote voted Republican 50.6, Democrats 47.8, roughly about 2.8%. So going from 2.8% all the way up to 3.6, that would be roughly a swing of 6.4% towards the Democratic direction from 2024 to 2026. Now, it's not going to work exactly this way because what we see now with the redistricting in Texas. But just to show you, based on the 2024 map, we could shift the map by 6.4% towards the Democrats and show you what this would look like. Okay, so we're going to shift by 6.4, and the Republican map, which voted 220 to 215 for the GOP, would then go 234 for the Democrats, 201 for the Republicans. So the current polling, which a 3.5-point win for the Democrats right now, is actually pretty modest compared to what 2018 was, which was a much larger win for the Democrats in a Democratic midterm year. The Democrats can get up to 234 House seats. And the Republicans know they pretty much have no chance at keeping the House on the way the House map is currently redrawn based on the projections for 2026. That's why they're trying to redraw the map and essentially stop that from happening. Now, at this current point in time, given how the polling is looking, even though the state of Texas is redrawn, I would still say the Democrats have a much stronger chance at winning the House in 2026, even with Texas being redrawn, because there are a lot of factors here still going on. For one thing, it does seem like the California redistricting of the House map is going to pass as well. And in this one, it's not finalized yet. I do believe we have to wait and see how this all plays out. But I think you could certainly see Republicans like Kevin Kiley losing his seat, David Valadao, California 22, could be going blue. We could see Young Kim in California 40, Ken Calvert in California 41. All 4 of those Republicans could certainly lose their seats, almost pretty much guaranteed in redistricting in California. And then maybe go after a Republican like Darrell Issa in the redistricting as well. That could be the 5 seats right there in California that Texas gained. All 5 in California could potentially be wiped out by redistricting if they were to do it that way. You could try and redraw the map to get some of these other Republicans out as well, but the reports that I read suggested that Issa, Ken Calvert, Young Kim, and then David Valadao and Kevin Kiley are the ones to watch for getting redistricted out for 2026. Now, Florida is very interesting as well, as Governor Ron DeSantis has pledged to redraw his map as well and try and get some Democrats out here and get some more Republican seats as well. We could be looking around here, for instance, Jared Moskowitz district. This is near where President Trump is in Palm Beach. Do the Republicans gain here? Do they draw out Kathy Castor, the Democratic representative in the Hillsborough, Tampa area? Can they draw that seat out, get that to Republican side? That all remains to be seen. it's going to be really interesting to watch how redistricting goes. You also see maps like Illinois, which are already heavily redistricted. Maryland, for instance, the Democratic governor, Wes Moore, has mentioned the possibility of trying to redraw the map to get rid of the Republican Andrew Harris in this district. We could see a lot of this nationwide happen over the next few months and few weeks or so, and how that could all play out. There is also an interesting development happening right now in the state of Utah. I just want to mention before the video ends, which is I believe there was a lawsuit saying that the congressional map is not constitutional, and if that map gets redrawn, that can pretty much guarantee the Salt Lake district of District 4 with Burgess Owens would flip to the Democrats. This would net the Democrats one extra seat in the state of Utah. So this is very interesting to watch for how this is all going right now, because we may see some Democratic flips on the lawsuit level as well on the House map. So everything is still very up in the air for 2026 and the U.S. House elections. Right now, the Republicans are currently up 5 seats in the redistricting in the state of Texas, as well, with a very competitive race in Texas 28 with Henry Cuellar. But this is all going to change a lot over the next few months and heading into 2026. So I'll keep you covered on everything that develops, but that's where things stand at this current point in time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and I hope to see you in a future video.